What is going on, everyone? My name is Jason Vincent, and I am a wedding and documentary photographer based out of Northwest Arkansas. And today we're going to be talking about this, the Sony 16-35 f4 lens with power zoom. Okay, so first things first, what is this lens exactly? Well, it is a constant aperture f4 lens that can be zoomed from 16 millimeters to 35 millimeters. This means you'll get the same f4 aperture throughout the zoom range. Now, the cool thing about this is that the entire zooming function is done quickly and silently using XD linear motors tied to optics inside the lens. So the lens won't grow or shrink as you change the focal length. This is great because there are a lot of zoom lenses that can start off with a small and compact size, but then get significantly bigger when in use. But this lens is a bit shorter and lighter than my 24mm prime, and that won't change as you use the lens. Another thing worth mentioning is that this lens will work amazingly for anyone that uses a gimbal or Steadicam, even if you're using a smaller compact setup. The small form factor of this lens paired with the internal zoom means you won't have issues with balance even if you need to adjust the focal length. Now, when it comes to changing the zoom, you can actually do that in 4 different ways. The first is with the traditional ring on the lens, although because the zooming function is controlled by these XD linear motors, the ring feels similar to the focus by wire you're probably used to with other mirrorless lenses. The only thing I don't like about this is that you can't see any changes on the lens as you zoom, so you won't be able to see where on the focal length you are unless you are looking at the screen or the EVF. Now, an interesting fact is that if you set the lens to, say, 35 millimeters and turn off your camera, the next time you turn your camera back on, it will remember your last zoom setting. But if you remove the lens or change out a battery, the lens will reset back to a 16mm default. This may be important to remember if you have your camera set up to record and need to change out a battery. You'll have to reset your focal length if it wasn't set to the default 16mm. From here, you can also opt to use the rocker on the side of the lens, which unlocks some super cool features that we'll get into here in a little bit. But next, you can also program custom buttons on some cameras to control the zoom, or if you have a camera like the Sony FX3, you can use the rocker that is near the shutter button. Lastly, you can even control the zoom from the Sony remote control. Okay, now why on earth would anyone want to have so many options for controlling the zoom? Well, the main thing this feature unlocks is the ability to do the super cool dolly zoom effect you see in some movies. This effect actually takes a lot of fancy gear and a lot of the times more than one person to pull off. But with the power zoom feature, even me as a very novice video shooter can make it happen. All you have to do is press the zoom rocker and then walk toward or away from your subject as you zoom. Now, you can do this with traditional zoom lenses, but it's very hard to get a smooth and consistent zoom by hand, which is why there are all the fancy gear and multi-person setups. But with the power zoom, you can use the settings in the camera to control the speed of the zoom depending on what you're going for. To make things even better, the rocker on the lens is also pressure sensitive. So if you press it all the way down, the lens will zoom quickly, or you can press it just a little bit down and it will go a lot slower. So pair this with something like a motorized slider and you can get a consistent and clean dolly zoom effect. Another great thing that Sony did here is allow you to set a zoom speed while recording and a different zoom speed while in standby. So if you want a super slow zoom while recording, you won't have to deal with that slow speed when trying to quickly set up a focal length before recording. Outside of this, the lens hosts an amazing set of features and upgrades, especially in comparison to the Zeiss 16-35 f4. For one, the zoom lens has an aperture ring, which is rare for zoom lenses to have, but Sony has started to add these to their zoom lineup, such as this lens and the recent 70-200 version 2. Having this ring allows you to change the aperture mid-recording for some unique depth of field effects. The lens also has an iris ring lock, so if you prefer to set the ring to A, to control things from the camera, you won't have to worry about accidentally hitting the ring out of place. It also has a custom function button, a declicking aperture switch, and a switch to go between autofocus and manual focus. As for the internal, Sony took special care to minimize focus breathing, so you won't see any crazy distractions when moving from near to far focus points. And the focus won't need to be adjusted or fine-tuned when changing the focal length. Okay, so we've pretty much covered the big hitting features for this lens, and by now you can probably guess that this lens is primarily for video shooters. So while I did use this lens for a handful of shoots as well as some documentary images of my family, the f4 is a little limiting for my style of work, though I could definitely see myself using this lens for reception coverage at a wedding. While most reception spaces are pretty dark, the focus speed on this lens is great even in lower light. and having a small compact lens on the dance floor would be a nice thing to have. So the question remains, should you get this lens? If you're in the market for a 16-35 and have debated getting the 16-35 f4 Zeiss, then definitely go for this one. It's smaller, lighter, has more features, and is all around a better lens for a cheaper price tag. If the power zoom feature, along with the adjustable aperture while shooting, will give you some, useful tools while shooting video, then it's definitely a great buy there as well. Now for photo, I live in a world of prime lenses, and it's hard for me and the way I shoot to go from an f1.4 lens to an f4. But if you love zooms, f2.8 to f4 isn't that huge of a jump, and you would save yourself a good chunk of money as well as size and weight compared to the 16-35 f2.8. So that comparison might be a toss-up depending on how you shoot and the conditions you would need the lens for. If you have any questions or thoughts on this lens, definitely drop them in the comments. If you're interested in picking one up, you can find a link in the description below. You can also find a link to my Instagram. I'd love for you to follow me along over there, as well as here on Sharpen. Lastly, if you're interested in seeing any of my premium content, make sure to hit that Patreon link. There, I do some deep dives into lighting, post-production, and I even have a series called Seeing the Light, where I find interesting light in my house, find out what's causing it, how to recreate it, and then how to manipulate it in order to create something interesting. The entire idea here is to equip you so that you can walk into any room and have the tools you need to create amazing images. So with that, until next time, I'm out of here.